Here is another one of my planning videos in terms of the power distribution. Now, I think I touched lightly on it while I was recording, and I mentioned something about my spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentation, or that I use Excel for to be able to kind of put a diagram together, and likewise I use PowerPoint. Um, and well, I won't even touch as to why I was going to add some other notes, but regardless, here is what I was referring to. So, um, first and foremost, if you're going to have an engine swap, you need to sort out your power distribution, how all the new components are going to receive battery, excuse me, 12 volt power and ground, and likewise how they're going to get connected. Now, these engines are just a really huge mess. I'm going to call it mess of just fuses and power with another fuse and another relay scattered everywhere. And when you look at wiring diagrams, it's easy to sit there and go, I'm done with the wiring process. In fact, I've told several people that I would rather pull all the wires and do the wiring myself than to troubleshoot when there is a wiring scenario that's faulty, some kind of a short or something that's that's not running correctly. I hate troubleshooting it because I hate staring at wiring diagrams. But I understand them enough to be able to make them from scratch. So I was pretty happy that I was able to do this from scratch. Now, several things that you need to have with you in your arsenal of tools, we'll call it, make it sound a little bit more exciting, is you need to understand the gauge coding. So if you're looking at the service manual, here is the gauge. For instance, if it's a 20 gauge wire, it's going to say zero point 0.5, and depending on the service manual, you'll see one of these two listed. So that gives you a better understanding of of what you're looking at. So, like, let's say you see the air pump wire, and somewhere on there's a 8.0. Look, that was a bad example because it's 8 gauge, but let's say there's a 2.0 or just a 2 in usually like parentheses. That means it's a 14 gauge wire. So you have an idea of what you're looking for. Um, One, you need to know why, because there's an amperage rating. But two, also, let's say you have two red wires that are coming out and one's a little bit thicker than the other one. This alone will help you at least to be able to separate them if maybe they were cut and you're not sure which is which. So that's another thing that can kind of help. Not really a super awesome benefit to it, but just as an FYI, you can use that for it. I also like to keep this wiring gauge table available. There's various sources of them, but this kind of tells you, hey, if you're going to be running, like let's say you have a device that says it requires a 30 amp fuse and it goes from one side of the engine bay to the other, and it's about 5 feet, then you can get away with only running a 16 gauge wire to it. I mean, if you want to be on the safe side, that means go one size up. I tend to do that. If it's more than 7 feet, 10 feet, like let's say it's a 30 amp fuse and I'm going 10 feet. So again, 14 gauge should be more than sufficient. You're within the green. You're going to be okay. But I always go. You know what? I'm going to go 12. I want to. If I want to be sure. It also allows me to play with it a little bit more. Maybe loop it around something that I need to. But anyway, so keep that in mind. So if I'm running a fuse and it's 5 feet, I go okay. 30 amp is 16 gauge. Let's say it was only a 10 amp fuse. I could go as little as 18 gauge, nice and thin, and make it all the way across as long as I'm staying within the 5, 7, 10 foot range. Notice it goes all the way over here. Once I get to 15, that's when I need to upgrade. So keep that in mind. That table is pretty helpful. Okay, so what did I decide to do? Well, first, I looked at the main components. The battery is in the back, and that still needs to feed my bulkhead. So what I did is I said, okay, uh, I am going to run. This may change, but right now, my goal is to run the three. I identified the three main wires that go to the 81, and this is what's going to feed all the internal components of the 81 vet. And I said I'm going to connect them to the starter. Now they're not individual ones. I'm just using that for reference, but all three of these wires are actually going to connect to the same location on the starter. And that's the same thing. The main battery wire that runs through the tunnel is going to connect. So all these wires are going to be connected the same location. One of the few points where both engines or both of the components are going to connect. Aside from that, of course, you have a battery that's going to connect to the chassis, so that's the battery. Then what I'm going to do is from the battery, I'm going to go up to the distribution block. Now, this has changed, and I'm no longer, I was originally going to use this distribution block. Yeah, I'm anal when it comes to all this stupid stuff, and I was actually showing all the pictures there. I have just changed this, and now what I'm doing is I am actually running this fuse block here, which is the original C4 block, directly to this starter connection down here. All right, we're just going to move this guy out of the way for now. All right, so what I'm doing now is the battery comes to the starter. It also feeds the 81s, and then there's a I think it's a 4-gauge wire coming up to this fuse block. And in the intro video, you saw this little fuse box sitting on the upper passenger side of the firewall. So that's going to come here, and that's feeding all these fuses. All right, so let's start from the top. What I did here is this is what the original box is, and this is how I'm going to be using them. And this isn't set in stone, so if 2 videos from now I record something and these change, don't troll me with like, I thought you said 3 was going to be 5. It happens. Regardless, so the ECM is going to be the same. 20 amps, and here I listed the gauges, so ignore this column here, but it's an 18 gauge wire, and that's going to go directly to PCM. Fuel 2, which was the fuel pump, is now going to be for the air pump, so that's going to be the small pump, and that's going to go to the small pump relay, so it's going to power it. And then here is the actual amperage. So here's a 20 amp fuse, 20 amp fuse. The water pump, which is now electric, has a 20 amp fuse. That goes there. All right, and I'm just going to go quickly. So of course, primary fan, secondary fan. Now, if you notice here, there's 3 relays for the fans. So the fan circuit is actually controlled by 3 relays, but only 2 of them receive power. This is more for the programming and to help control between the primary and the secondary. So there's those. And then here I have 2 relays. I'm only using one now. So it's only one, and this guy is actually feeding both relays now. Okay, which left me this empty one and this one as well. So that's the power distribution that you saw in the intro video goes. All right, now the alternator has 2 wires, and I believe I showed that in the intro video too, and those go terminals, the BAT terminal and the S terminal, and these go directly here, and both of these help the direct charging for the alternator. Then you have the F terminal. The F terminal is actually the alternator one, and this is an exciter slash charging fuse. And what it does is, and what you need is you need a fused connection to this. We'll leave it at that because this is just the 2 little internal fuses. And then the alternator also has the L terminal, which is the check battery light. And this guy, this is only the brown wire to the actual light. And then the light actually connects to a fuse source, which is the mill fuse, and then connects to the fuse box. Now, right now, in my plans, I am creating 2 separate fuse boxes. Okay, and this one is going to be activated by the distributor, which is this one here is going to be activated by the distributor, which will allow all these fuses to be activated during the crank and start cycle. Then we have this fuse box here, which I still haven't decided where it's going to go. I think it's going to go internal, but this is going to be controlled by the auxiliary fan, and I'll show a little bit more. I'm just going briefly over it because I have another more detailed PowerPoint slide that shows how it goes. But these are all going to be on, as you can see here, run and accessory. So during the run phase and the accessory phase, these connections will be activated. The reason why I'm separating them as of now is because during the start cycle, you want the least amount of components um, activated. When you're cranking, you have so many cranking amps and so much amperage that is being run through it that the more you add, the less it's the more it takes away from the actual cranking process. So in this case, I need to make sure that the transmission is affected. I need the fuel injectors. I need the ignition coil, obviously. I need the ECM or the PCM to understand the signal and translate it. And then, of course, I need the engine one, which powers a couple of little extra devices as well. So these are the primary and the least amount that I've identified at this time. And so those will be there. Again, these fuses are going to be activated during the start process and then continue running when the engine is as well. Okay. All right. So uh, that is in raw form, the distribution power that I showed. The last one, sorry, the last one here that isn't even connected to these is the fuel pump relay. That's going to be running somewhere inside the cabin. Um, um, but the only reason why I put the gray is because the PCM actually sends a signal to the fuel pump relay, and then this itself is activated. Okay, so now that we've shown that, I'm going to show this briefly before I go to PowerPoint, but here is what I used to plan it out. So first, I identified all the fuses, and I'll give you an example here. Here's fuse number one. It's the engine fuse. Um, uh, it's fuse number 30 in the 96 book service manual on page 1088. See, I wanted to make sure I was exact. Then I identified the pin that it had. So pin is G2 on 100C. That's the connector, the bulkhead connector labeled C. And just for clarification, the the bulkhead connector is three different connectors. They're identified as 100A, 100B, 100C. 100A is the huge master connector that's inside the firewall in the cabin. 100C is the engine harness and how it connects from the outside to the A connection. And then 100B, which you see right here, is the forward lamp harness, and that connects via the well, that's what has like the radiator fans, the smog pump, and things like that. Okay, so that's why there's the 100B connection. So again, here I put the the fuse amperage, which is 10, the connection 100C, the pin is G2, circuit ID is 339, the wire is pink, the type of connection, it needs to be ignition during run and start. And then I listed here um, uh, this this actual pink wire that's coming over here actually activates all these connections here. So it powers them. So the EGR solenoid, the evap canister solenoid valve, and the mass airflow sensor. It also leads off to the secondary air injection pump. But I put these, and this method of organization allowed me to go, okay, let's separate which ones need to be on during the, like you see over here, during the start phase, and which ones are fine not starting, not being energized until after I let go of the crank or start phase and the engine's just running. Okay. I then did this right here and I said, okay, both of these, this is when I decided I'm just going to go through the ignition fuse. This is this part right here. Ignition fuse 6, how I sent them out to these two relays. Okay. So I went ignition fuse is going to power both of these. So I'm going to basically there's a Y coming here. And here's the two relays and their wiring, you know. And so I was like, okay, this one is going to be the auxiliary one. That goes into pin 85. The ground is pin 86. And then the 87 goes to the fuse block post 2. Here, same thing. The difference is post 1 and that this is the wire that activates the relay. So I'll touch on that in the PowerPoint presentation. I just want to make sure you understood. And every single one of these fuses is just, like I said, I just brought them all here just so that I would understand where they are, how to locate them, and what they trigger, activate, or are responsible for so that I could, you know, so that I could separate them between crank and run and accessory and run, or simply run. All right, so now let's take a look at the actual fuse boxes after the fact. So this is the power distribution directly from the battery. And then now let's look how this setup right here works. All right, so here is the PowerPoint slide that I created so that I would know how this is going to run. And I get a little bit more detailed. I also put the relays, their pin configuration, and the diagram as to how they works. So I'm going to touch on it briefly. You know, I don't know if I'll go into more detail. You can Google these relays and you have better understanding. But the way it works is the relay is two circuits. Think about it as a dam, you know, that holds the water. The water is constantly pressing on the dam, and there is a small handle button trigger source somewhere on a control panel that someone can pull down with extremely simple effort. Probably a 5-year-old could pull the trigger, the button, or what have you, which releases the dam and allows the water to flow. As long as that source is pressed, the water's constantly flowing. Once you press the button off or lift the handle to the off position, it closes the dam, and now there's no longer any water getting to the other side. So the water is stopped from flowing. Okay, that essentially is what a relay is. So the way it works is here is a direct connection or a direct power source. So here is the battery, which is fused, and that's what we were seeing here. This is what's coming to the relays. So that's this section right here is, excuse me, is this part right here. That's that red connection. And this comes, and this is like the water, it's going directly to 30. Here is the dam right here. And see, right now, the water is being stopped or the power is being stopped right here. Here is the connection that's going to trigger this to either close or open. Now, this is naturally closed right now, which means, or normally closed. And so you get the distributor wire and you get the ground and they tie in right here. When I turn the key to start or run, it activates this circuit and therefore closes this, or in my example, opens the dam so that the water can flow or the power can flow. And as long as this guy's on, the water is constantly flowing to this fuse block, which is energizing all these fuses. The minute I shut off the key and this closes, boom, this handle raises up. It's like the dam coming down. Now there's no flow. In this case of electricity, in the example, it was water. The advantage to that is similar to where if you would try to go and manually grab that dam and lift it up, you wouldn't be able to. You don't have the strength to it. And even if you did, how long are you going to last? That's where relays come in. Relays, I can put like a 22 gauge wire and activate, 60, 80 amps and 12 continuous volts to flow through here. So in other words, you can have a very low trigger source on and off switch basically, and it controls a high voltage or high amped circuit. Okay, so hopefully that made a little bit sense, but that's why I have two independent relays. The on and off switch for this one is going to be the auxiliary fan wire from the 81. And the on and off switch for this relay, or what's going to turn it on, is the distributor wire. The distributor wire has to be on when it's cranking. So therefore, anything that this activates or sends power to is going to be on during the cranking phase and the start phase. And here are the uh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 devices that require, or 6 circuits that require the power. So there you go. That's how that's going to work. So when I connect all these and I start the car, these will allow the car to start and function correctly, the engine to run, the components need to be running. And then once I let go of the key so that it comes back to the runs, then all of them will be running because they all are live during run. And here's the O2 sensors, the alternator circuit, the both of the cooling fans. Here is the alternator excite or connection, which is going to go here. And then this 139 circuit, which is going to power all of these here. So there's that. Sorry, I can't get into more details about it, but just kind of give you an idea of how I planned it. And in the intro video, you saw that this box here is actually on the firewall. And like I said, I didn't show this one, but I'm going to be, I might be putting this inside the cabin. I haven't made up my mind yet. But I think so. That way I can use these for maybe the gauges. So just kind of giving you a take on that. Lastly, I'm going to show you the diagram for what I'm going to do with um, uh, the two options that I have for the fuel pump. So here's another relay. And the way it goes is the PCM sends signal via this pin. So um, um, A7 or pin number 7 on the A connector is a dark green and white wire, and this goes to pin 85 on a relay, and then this is grounded here. Then this, when I turn on the PCM says, "Hey, we need gas." It turns on this relay, just identified as fuel pump relay, and then that sends power. 12 volts positive goes all the way here. This needs to have a fuse, and this sends it to the fuel sending unit, which then um, uh, sends it directly to the pump. So here, this is the fuel sending unit, and it's at a ground connection, a signal connection, and a 12 volt positive feed, which is gray. So once it hits here, this hits the fuel pump, which is part of the fuel sending unit. Sorry about that. Hopefully you understood that. The fuel pump is inside the fuel sending unit, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. And it receives power and basically says, "Hey, fuel pump, you need to start." It's already grounded because of the connections here. And then the fuel sending unit will send the signal to the gauge because that's activated. Now, on the LT1 stock, you have an oil pressure switch which sits on the same connection in a T connection for the oil pressure sensor. That's what sends the pressure readings to the oil pressure gauge. But it has an oil pressure switch, and the way it works is it's got a pin D, and this is energized as soon as the engine has enough pressure. It connects a little mini switch that it has here and starts sending power as well to the fuel pump. Now, one of the advantages of that is if this relay, for some reason, goes bad, guess what? You still have a power source to it. So it helps with that. You will be able to note that it's not as strong. Maybe that's when you kind of start feeling that, it's a little bit hesitant, but at least it won't die on you. And then you can start troubleshooting and realize that it's probably the relay that went bad. That's a nice thing to have. I'm not going to get I'm not going to install that. Here is what I am doing. As you can tell, I pulled it just directly. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to have a fuel pump relay. I will have somewhere inline here security source, a special trigger that turns it on or off. Everything else is the same. The battery is going to be powering this fuse here. So sorry, this relay. So similar to what I just showed, PCM is going to send a signal here. This is already a grounded relay. And since I'm going to have this relay probably by the battery, that's why the connection's so close. When this turns on with the signal, then the battery, which is on a 20 amp fuse, is going to send power to pin 87 on the relay, shoot it out to 30, inline fuse and securities cutoff switch somewhere around here, and then power the fuel pump inside the fuel sending unit. So I had to visually create this, and this video is probably pretty long, but I wanted to show a little bit of the background. Some people can do this just by like planning. I had to create a visual so that I knew exactly where I stood and what was going to happen, how I was going to do it. That's why it spanned across my Excel spreadsheet and um, uh, my PowerPoint slide here. And if you think I'm making this up and I did that, I will show you just to kind of give you an idea. Here are, and I may touch on these. Here's some of the planning that went into this. So as you can tell, I separated everything to get an idea of what I was going to have to connect. Here's the neutral park one. Hopefully I'll touch on these in the videos. I don't know. Again, these videos are getting longer and longer, and I don't want that. But I wanted to give everyone an idea of the planning that it takes or the planning that it took me to be able to get to, like I said in the intro video, to where I'm at now, where the engine sits, why I'm doing what I'm doing. So, method to my madness. Hopefully, some of you guys, it'll be helpful to some of you. To those of you rolling your eyes, I apologize, but that's my mentality. Anyways, thanks for watching. Thanks for being here at the end of the video, and please subscribe and share maybe in the forum. Totally like that. I mean, be a good person and do a good deed. And again, thank you. Have a great one.